Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today we're going to be answering a question by David Brunham from the Hive Mind, and he asked, can you do a video about common auger bit problems? Mine are always jamming up or sliding off the mark. How do we fix that? So let's... Auger bits are an incredibly ingenious device. They have a lead screw that pulls them through the work, and then blades that remove the chips, spurs or nickers that come through and give you a nice clean wall, and they will give you a very efficient, clean hole without much fuss. The problem is, the more complicated things get, the more things that can go wrong, and there are a lot of little issues. So first, let's actually take a look at the auger bit and talk about the parts. Number one, you have the snail or the lead screw. There's a whole pile of different names for this, and there's a pile of different names for everything. But this will actually pull it through. Imagine this being the motor that actually drives this thing. You are pushing a screw through. Now, one of the problems is that becomes a wedge, and so if you're working with thin stock, that can actually split your wood out. You need to be careful of that. Number two, you have the cutting edge, the blade. And you have two of these on this particular style, one coming out here and one coming out here. And then number three, you have the spur or the nicker. And this is a blade that sticks up vertically on the outside. And this is what actually determines the width of the hole. The distance from the outside of this spur to the outside of this spur gives you the diameter of the hole you're cutting. I have a couple videos dedicated to sharpening auger bits, and I'll leave the link to those down below. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to be looking at some of the most common problems. And the most common problem is that the snail gets clogged up and then it starts spinning in the hole. The snail stops pulling it through the wood. So what's going on there? This is what you'll commonly see, is that the snail, the screw here, gets loaded up with wood, and sometimes you'll see it filled all the way up. And when it's loaded up with wood, then the teeth on the screw can't pull this forward. So a lot of people think that there is a problem with their snail when it starts getting clogged up. 99% of the time, the problem is not with the snail, but with the blade. What would cause that? Well, the problem is that the blade has to be cutting, and if the blade isn't cutting into the work and diving into it, then all it is a large surface that's stopping it from going forward. And eventually those threads are just going to strip out and start spinning. And so if the blade is not sharp, the snail will clog up. So most of the time, if the snail is clogged, you need to sharpen a little more. Another problem could be that you're actually using the wrong tip for the type of wood you have. Now, most of them look something like this, and the threads are pretty decent. They're deep enough to cut in, but they're coarse enough to actually pull it through. This one has a very fine thread. This one's actually a double wrap thread, so there's two threads going all the way around. And then this one is an incredibly coarse thread. And so this one is going to pull the screw through much faster. This will go through almost 3 times faster than this one. And so what that means is if I'm using this one on a very hard wood, that means that my cutting edge is going to be taking off 3 times more material than this one will. And so because of that, this cutting edge is under a lot of work. And if it's not incredibly sharp, I'm going to have problems with this coarse thread on very hard woods. But on soft woods, that's usually not a problem. So this coarse thread for some of your softer pines will pull this through and be very efficient. Whereas a fine thread on pine may actually slip out because the threads aren't big enough to bite into that very soft wood. So you may end up needing a coarse set and a fine set, but for most applications, I just go with an average medium, and it does pretty well with everything. Now let's look at a problem with some of the holes. You can see this one, this is the entry side. They've got a lot of splinters coming out. The entry side should be really nice and clean. It should be a very sharp hole coming all the way around. And if it's doing this, that's usually a sign that your spurs or your nickers need to be sharpened up. You take the file and file out the inside, not the outside, because if you file the outside, you're changing the diameter of the cutter. You want to just make sure you're filing the inside. Get that nice and sharp. If you can get that really good and sharp, you're going to get a very clean entry hole. Then we can flip the board over and you see the exit wound. Oh my, that looks horrible. That's an incredibly ragged edge. How do you fix that? Well, the way to fix an exit wound is to never have an exit wound. You just drill until the tip starts to come out the other side, just a little bit. Then you stop, turn it around, and come from the other side. And that way you have 2 entry holes, which give you a really nice clean cut from the spur. And you don't have to worry about that blasting out the other side. Now one of the problems, I've got a mark on the board and I want to put this bit in and run straight down. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come in here, and rather than putting it vertical onto it, I'm going to come in from the side and I'm going to rest the tip on. And that way I'm not actually creating a divot yet. And I can line it up. Once it's sitting where I want it to be, I can lift it up so it's vertical on the hole and then start drilling. But better yet, rather than drawing with a pencil, grab an awl. Take the awl, makes it much easier to set that hole, and actually create a divot precisely where you want it to be. Now what's going to happen is sometimes you can see here this divot slid over a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. I just know I want the hole to go that way a little ways. So when I put this in here, I'm not going to put the drill vertical. I'm actually going to aim it the direction I want it to go, and I'm going to do a crank or two, and now the screw is pulling that way. Now I can put it up vertical and I can be exactly where I want it to be. So before you start drilling in with these spurs, just aim where you want to go, and you can actually get a little bit of travel before the spurs engage that will move your hole one way or the other so you can get it directly on that. And then once the blades start going in, you're committed. That's where your hole is. And look at that. Really clean entry hole. Ah, I love a good bit. When you're working with antique bits, sometimes you'll run into different things. The tip might be missing on the auger bit. And usually if the tip is missing on the auger bit, you can come in with a triangular file and try to reshape it and give it a new tip a little lower down. But then you're going to end up with a bit that just doesn't pull quite as well as it should originally. So once the tip is broken, this whole thing is pretty much trash. It's one of those things you can't recover from. The next problem is that the spurs have been sharpened so often that the spurs are lower than the cutting edge. And if the spurs are lower than the cutting edge, you're not going to get that clean cut from the entry hole. You're going to end up taking chips out from the main blade before the spur touches the wood. So if the spurs get lower than the main cutting edge, you probably can't restore this anymore. It's a dead tool. Another problem I've seen a few times is rather than having this cutting edge with a nice clean 30 degree angle, is that it will be a blunt edge. Someone's filed it up to like a 50 degree angle. And if you're doing soft woods, you can probably get away with that. But in most woods, a snail is not going to be able to pull a 50 degree angle through the wood. You're going to have to do a lot of work to restore that bevel. And in many cases, that means they're trash. Now, that's kind of a scary thing because antique tools, a lot of times you can restore them and repair them. But with an auger, there's only so much steel there. Once you wear through it, you really can't fix it. Yes, you could weld stuff back on and then refile it down, but you know, it's a 50-cent auger bit. You can usually go and pick them up in box lots and buckets for basically nothing. Now, if you have a full set and that happens to be one out of the set, that can be very, very sad. But you know, if you look around online, you can probably find a matching one to fit that set. Or you can do what I do and actually switch out to a newer set that works even better. Eventually I got tired of digging through 30 or 40 bits to find one that's good and sharpening it up and cleaning it and hoping that it still has a usable life left on it. And so that's why I've actually switched over to the new Wood Owl bits. These things are incredible. With the 3 blades, they give a really good clean cut. They don't take much force, and I can get a lot more out of these. This is just a much better designed bit than the old Jennings or Irwins. But they cost more, so you got to kind of play that balance. You can get the cheaper way of getting old antiques and cleaning them up. Sometimes you got to dig through them to find good ones, or you can just jump in and buy something you know that's going to work. So it just depends on what your price range is. But most of the time, the problem with them is that they're just not sharp. If it's not performing the way you want it to, and the snail has some life and the spur has some life, then file it down and sharpen it off. I'll leave a link to the other videos I'm talking about with the sharpening and maintenance of them, as well as a video where I show why I went with the Wood Owl bits. There's links to those down below. But I hope this helped you out. Most of the time, the problem with the bit is that it's just not sharp. It's one of those things that you never really think about with most drill bits. They go until they're dull and then they're just not quite as efficient, but they still work. With an auger bit, once it gets dull, it stops working. It doesn't just work less, it means that it just doesn't work at all. So you got to spend a lot more time on it. Make sure that your spur is good, make sure that your snail has all the life in it, and then sharpen it up and it'll treat you well for a long time to come. I hope this answered some questions. I know it probably opened up quite a few more. If you have some questions that I didn't meet in here, let me know those down in the comments down below. I do read through all the comments, and I answer as many as I can get to. So if you have that, let me know that down below. If you have any suggestions, let me know that down as well. And if you would like to support the channel, you can hit that like button. Oh, I know I didn't talk about Patreon, but that's because with the algorithm and where things are going, hitting the like and subscribe, that really does help out the channel, so thank you for that. But if you want to help out even more, there's always Patreon and becoming a member, clicking the join button. Everyone scrolling over here on the side, they're quite literally the ones keeping this channel going. So thank you for that. If you'd like to find out more, there's links down below, or click the little button. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Well, depending upon which auger bit I was looking at, either we got to the point and took care of it, or this video was pointless.